Hello everyone. The topic I am going to discuss about is components of refrigeration, and the topic is about evaporators. Evaporation. What is an evaporator? The function of an evaporator is to absorb heat from the surrounding location or medium which is to be cooled by means of a refrigerant. The evaporators may be classified as follows. According to operating conditions, it is divided into two types: flooding type evaporators and dry or direct expansion type evaporators. This is the difference between flooded and dry type evaporator. Flooded type evaporator. In flooded type, the rate of heat transfer is more than than the dry type. In dry type, the rate of heat transfer is less compared to flooded type. Flooded type, it has more complex design. As for dry type, it is easy to design. In flooded type, the size of flooded evaporator is larger than dry type. It requires more space to install this evaporator. As for dry expansion, it requires less space than flooded type, and it requires less liquid refrigerant comparatively to the flooded type evaporator. In flooded type, it requires more refrigerant. With the help of a float chamber, the liquid refrigerant is supplied into the drum of an evaporator in flooded types. However, as for dry types, it uses a capillary tube which controls the supply of liquid refrigerant. Flooded type, it is used for high capacity systems. As for dry expansion types, they are used for less capacity systems. These are the differences between flooded type and dry expansion type evaporators. Here we can see the structure and working process of flooded type evaporator. In this, the operation mode of the flooded type evaporator and dry evaporator is exactly opposite. In flooded type, the cold water passes through the heat exchange tube. The refrigerant completely immerses the heat exchange tube and absorbs heat and evaporates outside the heat exchange tube. The surface of the heat transfer tube of the flooded evaporator, it has a plurality of needle-shaped holes and a spiral protrusion on the inner surface of the tube which enhances the heat exchange on the cold water side. The high efficiency heat transfer tube that simultaneously enhances the boiling outside the tube and the heat transfer inside the tube. The heat transfer coefficient is increased by about 5 times compared with the light tube. Advantages and disadvantages and applications of flooded type evaporators. First, we are going to see about the advantages. One of the main advantages of flooded refrigerant is that poor distribution in the evaporation is reduced. Flooded evaporation has higher transfer rates, so that small size of flooded evaporator it can do the same work as the large size of any other evaporators can. In flooded evaporator, the refrigerant completely fills the evaporator coil, so that the heat transfer is much more efficient and cooling is improved. The chance of frost formation is much lower in this type. Disadvantages: it is not suitable for small scale systems or applications. It has a very complex design and requires additional components which increases the maintenance and overall cost of the evaporator. Applications: these are used in large installations, especially in chemical and food processing industries. It is used in multi-evaporator systems. It is also suitable for refrigeration systems where load fluctuation is higher. Now we are going to see about the dry evaporator structure and working process. In this, the liquid refrigerant is fed into the dry expansion evaporator by an expansion device which meters the liquid into the evaporator at a rate such that all the liquid is vaporized by the time it reaches the end of the evaporator coil. The dry evaporator refrigerant passes through the heat exchange tube and the cold water runs outside the heat efficiency heat exchange tube. The heat exchange efficiency of such a heat exchanger is relatively low, and the heat transfer coefficient is only about twice the heat transfer coefficient of the light pipe. The advantage is that it is easy to return oil and the control is relatively simple. Thus, charging the amount of refrigerant is about half to one third of the filling amount of the full liquid type unit. Advantages and disadvantages of dry expansion type evaporator. Most of the throttle devices it can adapt to load changes. It has good control and easy construction. It has very low cost. Because of large flow rate, it can be directly returned to compressor by the velocity of gas refrigerant itself. It requires only a low amount of refrigerant to function when compared to flooded type. It has lesser chances of flood back to the compressor. The disadvantage is that the superheated refrigerant it accounts for about 20% of the heat transfer area of the evaporator, but it can only provide a small amount of enthalpy of refrigeration. It has comparatively lower coefficient of performance. It runs with higher pressures. it slowly pulls down with heavy loads. It can be used only with moderate capacity refrigerations. Applications of dry expansion type evaporator. The water chilling in air conditioning plants, the liquid or brine solutions cooling in refrigeration plants, water heat in heat pump systems, household and it is used in household and domestic refrigerator. Household and domestic refrigerators. These are the applications of dry expansion type evaporator. In this, we have seen about what is an evaporator, what are the two types of evaporator, the working principle, the advantages, disadvantages, and applications of flooded and dry expansion type evaporator. Thank you.